Victor Furman. Some call me the Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. We start this evening with a question. Got stress? A recent survey says that Americans have high stress levels, and 53% said they received little or no stress management support from their health care providers. 2/3 of office visits to primary care physicians can be tied to stress. Stress can lead to inflammation, which contributes to long-term health problems like cancer and heart disease. My guest tonight, clinical psychologist Dr. Arthur Ciaramicoli, says we work too much, sleep too little, love with half a heart, and wonder why we are unhappy and unhealthy. In his new book, The Stress Solution, he provides readers with simple, realistic, powerful techniques for using empathy and cognitive behavioral therapy to perceive situations accurately, correct distorted thinking, and trigger our own neurochemistry to produce calm, focused energy. Dr. Ciaramicoli is a licensed clinical psychologist and the chief medical officer of soundminds.org, and that's soundmindz.org, a popular mental health platform. He's been on the faculty of Harvard Medical School and chief psychologist of Metro West Medical Center. He's the author of several books, including The Power of Empathy and Performance Addiction. His website is balanceyoursuccess.com. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ciaramicoli. Good evening, Doctor. How are you?
Good evening, Victor. Thank you for having me.
May I call you Arthur, or do you prefer Doctor?
Oh, no. Call me Arthur, please.
Wonderful, Arthur. Thank you so much. So we start out with this question, as the survey said. Why are we, as a nation, so stressed out?
Well, I think at this point, Victor, in time, we Americans have fewer friends. Trust has decreased as well as empathy, while prejudice has increased. I mean, half of Americans lie awake at night due to job stress, and 3/4 indicate they suffer from emotional or physical stress symptoms daily. So we've become, in my opinion, a society that places a great emphasis on achievement, status, and appearance, and far less on character and relationships.
Wow. Now, are stress levels as high in other parts of the world as they are in the United States?
The United States is one of the highest, although in Europe they are high also. In North America they are high as well, but we're leading the world at the moment.
Are there parts of the world that are stress-free?
Well, the Scandinavian countries have less stress, and according to the World Health Organization, interestingly, some of the third world countries have less stress. So it's quite interesting because we're the most affluent and educated nation in the world. And yes, yet we have the highest rates of stress. We have the highest rates of obesity, childhood diabetes, and childhood obesity. And we are among 13 nations, according to the World Health Organizations. We came in 13th in terms of health overall.
Wow, that's pretty amazing, considering that our medical system here has to be one of the top in the world, right?
Yes, but when we're living in this fast-paced society and when we don't take the time to be present with other human beings and we don't listen very well and we produce the stress hormone cortisol, which was, as you mentioned earlier, has many, many, many negative effects, we are not in a position to be very healthy despite the opportunities that are before us.
Now, you mentioned Scandinavia being a place of lower stress. I believe also that they have the highest rate of happiness in the world. Is that right?
Well, they have a higher rate of happiness than the United States, that's for sure. But, in one of the studies by the World Health Organization about 6 years ago, interestingly, Nigeria was first in happiness. And the Nigerians have far, far less than Americans have, for sure.
Wow, that's really... Did they say why?
Well, they rely on each other a great deal. They don't have much in terms of material possessions. They have to rely on each other to take care of each other's families. They have to rely on each other for food. They have to have a cohesive community to survive. And, we live in a society today where most people don't even know the names of their neighbors.
Right. So you're saying that the community interdependence contributes to the reduction of stress.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's why in this book I talk a great deal about empathy, because empathy is a way that we connect with other human beings beyond the surface. It's really when we connect and know how to listen to and connect with the heart and soul of other human beings. And when we do that, we produce the hormone oxytocin, which is called the love or connecting hormone. And oxytocin reduces anxiety levels and cortisol levels. It helps us live longer. It aids in recovery from illness. It promotes a sense of calm and well-being. It increases generosity and empathy, where stress reduces empathy. It protects against heart disease. It reduces inflammation. It reduces cravings for addictive substances. And so it creates a bonding and an increased trust with other people. So it decreases fear and creates a feeling of security. And that hormone is produced when we really connect and are present with each other in an empathic way. So there are so many benefits to being in positive relationships with other human beings where we truly feel understood. And we have moved away from that significantly in our society. I mean, many people are saying now that America is materially advanced, but spiritually we have decreased in terms of our ability to connect with other people and value character and really the way a person, who they are rather than what they do or the status they have in life.
I believe that our unfortunate 24-hour news cycle demonstrates that clearly on a daily basis.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned some of the elements. What else is missing in American society that causes so many successful people to have unsatisfied lives?
Well, stress is basically produced by misperception, and that's where empathy comes in, because when we're achieving at very high levels, and I work with many high achieving people, but when we're achieving at very high levels and we believe that the achievement in and of itself is going to bring us love and respect, we don't really know how to relate very well. I see people from all walks of life who are very successful, but their intimate relationships are very poor. Their marriages are very poor. They don't spend a lot of time with children. We spend on average about 25 hours less with children today than we did 10 and 15 years ago. So if we have to sacrifice our soul to be at the top of the ladder, everything else sort of deteriorates. And unfortunately, many people have grown in our society with what I call performance addiction, that belief, a mythical belief that achieving a status and perfecting appearance will lead to love and respect. And the truth is, what leads to love and respect is empathic relationships, deep connections with other human beings. And empathy is the capacity that makes us most successful, not only in our personal lives, but also our professional lives.
Let's talk a little bit more about performance addiction. Is that something that is new? Is it a more an 80s thing, or is that something that's been with us all along?
Well, it's more recent in time. I wrote the book Performance Addiction about 7 or 8 years ago because I noticed that I was beginning to see so many people whose resumes read so well, but their relationships were so poor and they were unhealthy. They were either overweight or they had high cholesterol, they had insomnia, they developed diabetes, they drank too much, and obviously they worked too much. So their religion really was to work as much as possible to make as much money as possible, believing that that's what would allow them to have the respect of other people. And I don't think they really realize that. So I do think it is a phenomenon that has been in the recent years, particularly in the last 15 years in our country.
How does performance addiction affect interpersonal relationships? For example, love between two people.
Well, performance addicts have what I call image love because they have tremendous difficulty loving. They base their own lovability on their daily performance, and unfortunately, they expect the same of their partner. They're constantly comparing and contrasting themselves and their partner to others. They find it easy to fall in love. The binding and blinding effects of early sex in the early phases of a relationship creates an illusion, an image of love, and they do very well in the falling in love stage, but they can't maintain it because they're always looking for their partner to embellish them, to lift up their self-esteem. They want to walk into a wedding or a party and have people look at who they're with because they're looking for that sense of self that they've never had in their lives. Performance addicts, performance addiction begins in our own homes, and then it's reinforced by the culture.
When, without mentioning specific individuals, when you see, for example, a man who has been married and divorced multiple times, and each time he gets a younger, more attractive bride. Is that something that indicates performance addiction?
Yes, that would indicate performance addiction and a tendency toward image love, because we see people. I mean, I used to take histories before and ask a person, have they been married? And now I have to ask them if they've been married twice or possibly even 3 times, because it's not so uncommon now, especially for high achieving people. High achievers have a tendency to want to look good, especially, and really this is more specifically for high achievers that have childhood hurts that they've never resolved. And they've come to think, because they're capable people and intelligent people, they've come to think that that's the only way they can get the applause in life. They were never really rewarded early in life for who they are. They were more given applause for what they did. So they never got the sense that who they are is as important as what they do.
And I assume that people who are performance addicts also have troubles with true intimacy.
Yes, they have trouble with true intimacy because they don't want to be seen beyond the surface, and they don't tend to look beyond the surface with other people either. And they tend to be more self-centered and self-absorbed, so they don't engage in reciprocal interactions.
Our guest tonight is Dr. Arthur Ciaramicoli. His book is called The Stress Solution, Using Empathy and Cognitive Behavioral Therapy to Reduce Anxiety and Develop Resistance. And we'll be back with Arthur after these brief messages on the OMTimes Radio Network.
As difficult as it is to believe, there are places in Africa where human traffickers sell albino children and their body parts for use in magic rituals. Humanity Healing International is actively working in Uganda to change this paradigm. The Albino Rescue Project finds albino children who are at risk and places them in safe schools and environments where they can learn and grow free from fear. To learn more or to sponsor a child, visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Circle of Hearts Radio is a sanctuary on the airwaves. Join me, Grandmother Elia, in the circle on Sunday, 2 p.m. Eastern, as I share information to both enlighten and nourish your soul.
What if we got rewarded for every good decision?
Dinner. Meal needs a vegetable. Check.
Amazing!
Vegetables cooked with a healthier oil instead of butter?
Fantastic! Replacing bad fats with healthier fats like those in canola or vegetable oil is good for your heart. Take up the challenge for good health, because the you of the future will say,
Fantastic!
Visit heart.org/facethefats. Canola Info proudly supports the American Heart Association's Face the Fats campaign.
More than 1 million wild animals are killed each year illegally. Poaching is a major threat to our country's wildlife. I'm Tom Barry. I'm an actor with a desire to preserve living space for wildlife. The Humane Society Wildlife Land Trust does just that. Works with private landowners to protect wildlife, to preserve natural habitats. To learn more or to work with the Humane Society Wildlife Land Trust, call 800-729-SAVE. That's 800-729-SAVE, or visit wildlifelandtrust.org. Thank you.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this evening, Dr. Arthur Ciaramicoli, author of the new book, The Stress Solution. And Arthur, we were talking in the first segment about the biological triggers that stress can turn on that result in illness and in particular inflammatory disease. Let's talk a little bit more about that. You mentioned cortisol.
Yes, when we misperceive, when we believe that someone doesn't like us or they're going to hurt us and we have an insecure feeling about them, we release the stress hormone cortisol, which incidentally limits our capacity for empathy. It really produces very narrow thinking, and it causes repetitive negative thinking. And if you have a number of these distortions, if you're overly sensitive to how people view you, or if you have prejudice, even prejudice produces cortisol. And if you have a number of these cognitive distortions, which is what cognitive behavioral therapy focuses on, these cortisol levels, if they're consistently in your body, not only do they cause negative thinking, but they also cause weight gain, inflammation, hair loss, they break down muscle tissue, they cause flabbiness, depression, anxiety, and most importantly, they cause memory loss. They actually kill neurons in the memory center of the brain.
Is there any connection between cortisol production and Alzheimer's disease?
Well, we don't know that for sure, but many theorists believe there is, because if we're killing neurons, it certainly can't help, and it really reduces our ability to think clearly. I don't know that there's been a proven connection between Alzheimer's and consistent cortisol levels, but I mean, that may be in the future.
And then the corollary question is, can these indications, these damages, be reversed?
Most of the time they can be reversed, but we need to learn how to calm ourselves, and that's where the capacity for empathy comes in. Because oftentimes people are confused with the difference between empathy and sympathy. Sympathy rushes into console. It's a very immediate reaction. But where empathy slows down to obtain facts, it's very objective. And when you slow down to utilize empathy, you produce that calming neurochemical oxytocin, and also you're much more able to perceive accurately. So it helps us do away with old biased thinking that was based on early conditioning and that distorts reality and causes unnecessary tension. So it's very important that when we use empathy and we enlarge our capacity for empathy, and we realize the difference between empathy and sympathy, we are going to calm ourselves, and the oxytocin that we produce counters cortisol. It really blocks the release of cortisol.
Let's talk a little bit about the concepts, the difference between empathy and sympathy. First of all, what's your definition of empathy?
Empathy is the capacity to understand and respond to the unique experiences of another. It's essentially everyday mind reading. It's part of our genetic endowment. It's not an emotion or a feeling, but a capacity that's innately present. We're born with this capacity, but if it's not developed, it will atrophy like an unused muscle. So empathy can be taught. We know that we're born with what are called now mirror neurons. There's a section of the brain that really contains the capacity to develop empathy, but it's different than sympathy. I can give you an example, actually, from a patient of mine the other day who felt very embarrassed that she heard that one of her neighbors' dad had died. And she didn't know the neighbor very well, but her father had passed the year before, and she was devastated by it. So she made a group. She got together flowers and put a basket of food together and fruit. And she went over to the woman's house and rang the doorbell and said, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. My father died last year. I know what it's like. You must be devastated." The woman looked at her and she said, "Actually, I appreciate your efforts, but I'm not devastated at all. My father left us when we were 2 years old, and I never saw him. I don't even remember him. I wouldn't know him if I saw him walking down the street, so I'm not devastated." You see, the woman who ran down the street and immediately assumed that woman was devastated, that was sympathy. Mm-hmm. Sympathy is when we're identifying with people. Empathy is when we stand back, slow down the process, and obtain the facts. And that's where we learn to perceive accurately. And when we can perceive accurately, it reduces stress significantly.
How can one cultivate empathy?
Well, empathy comes about when we really are very conscious about practicing it. First of all, the most important thing is to slow down. Second thing in interactions, ask open-ended questions. Don't ask closed-end questions. For instance, young teenager comes home from a date, and the mother had met the boy she was going out on a date with, and the young girl walks in the house, and the mother says, "Oh, honey, did you think he was cute?" Well, the mother is really saying, "I don't think he was cute," because most questions are statements. And when we ask closed-end questions like that questions, we kind of shut down the communication. When we ask open-ended questions, for instance, "How did your date go?" That's a neutral position. It's not really saying I feel one way or the other about somebody. But a lot of times we don't have the courage to ask a real question. What we're doing is we're giving our opinion indirectly through kind of implying that we're asking a question when we're already giving the answer. So one thing is to slow down. To ask open-ended questions. And also, we need to not make snap judgments. When we slow down, we can actually obtain the facts of a situation and really allow people to feel heard. That's why in this book I have a chapter on empathic listening. Because when you know how to listen from an empathic perspective, you will always have friends. And in fact, a Harvard Business Review only a few years ago did a long-term study on who were the most effective managers in the corporate world. They were the people with the highest capacity for empathy. And actually, there was another study that was done, that was trying to discern why certain people from prestigious MBA schools don't succeed in the corporate world. What was the answer after they interviewed hundreds of people in different corporations? That they didn't make people feel heard and they didn't make people feel understood. So that's the heart of empathy. So empathy is a capacity that allows us to evaluate situations accurately, to move away from cognitive distortions of the past and old conditioned learning or prejudices that we have, and it draws people in. People like being around us because they know we are rational and we can perceive the truth and see beyond the cover of the book, in essence. We can see into their soul where their real essence and their character lies.
I was a child of the 50s, and growing up in the 50s, I was taught by my mother that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, listen twice, speak once. And in today's digital world, the art of listening, I mean really listening to each other, what you're talking about, seems to be going the way of the dinosaur. How critical is empathic listening to our own health and our relationships?
Well, empathic listening is unquestionably critical, Victor. I think it's empathy is the most important capacity in terms of health and success, personal and professionally. When we use it, we connect in a reasonable and deep way with other human beings. And it also helps us to know who to get close to and who to stay distant from, because it allows us to perceive and look beyond the surface.
And what do you think about the millennials? Are they hopeful in terms of learning these skills again, or are the millennials actually, because of digital technology, drifting away?
Well, the millennials have, and that's where part of this testing has been done, they have less trust in other people and they have less empathy for other people. Elderly people actually have more empathy than millennials. And that's a problem. And I think, the instant messaging, the text messaging, Facebook, Twitter, all of these quick ways of communicating kind of have made relationships that really are not of much essence. And I'm not demeaning these opportunities. I mean, Facebook initially was a mechanism to allow families to stay in touch with each other. So it has a positive aspect, but some kids are addicted to it. I mean, they're sending 150 text messages a day.
You know, it's interesting. I know of a couple of young people who are in relationships, and if they send a text message to the partner in that relationship and do not receive a response within a certain amount of time, they actually get emotional about it. It's the connection between not getting that message and their self-worth is so powerful.
Yes, and you see it even in the corporate world. And I publish books, so I'm in the publishing world. But you get a text message, and if you don't answer it in 10 minutes, they say, "Are you there? Are you there?"
Yeah.
As if nothing else would preoccupy a person.
What do you think is the answer to that, to the digital revolution and the ability of people to be intimate and speak with each other and to listen to each other?
I think the answer is for us as parents and elders to teach young people that quality relationships and character and integrity in relationships are extremely important. And we have to slow down the pace. You don't allow your children to come to dinner, or you as adults with phones in your hand. I mean, it's not just young people. It's people in the business world, in the corporate world, in the political world. I see people in the media, the same thing. The pace is very fast. So the people around us pick up the same pace. I call it secondhand stress. So if you're at dinner and you go out to dinner and you see a family and all four of them are on their phones, what are they communicating to each other, and what are they teaching each other?
Yeah.
Teaching each other that I don't want to be with you. I'd rather be with somebody else that's not here.
Absolutely, someone that I don't have to truly be truthful with or interact intimately with.
Yes.
And that goes to the core of our feelings about ourselves, doesn't it?
Well, when you don't have quality relationships that don't have depth, when they're not beyond the surface, it doesn't sustain us. And what I've tried to point out in this book is we change our chemistry when we're involved in empathic interactions with each other. We produce protective chemicals that protect our physiology and our brain. So we're wired that way. We're wired to connect with each other. And when we have just superficial relationships, we're not really connecting. If you took a functional MRI of a person's brain, when they're communicating on Facebook with so-called friends that they've never even met in person, not much is happening in that brain. When you're actually touching another person, or you have a deep connection with another person, and it's an eye-to-eye communication, it changes our brain. It changes our physiology, and it's protective. And I think people, when they realize that, they tend to pay more attention to the quality of their relationships.
Should our educational system focus on teaching young children empathy?
Unquestionably, Victor. There are some institutes in the country where children go, in some of the private schools where they have empathy training, and these children and these young people score better on tests, standardized tests. And why? Because empathy teaches us to take in all the variables. It's like having a wide lens camera rather than a narrow camera.
Absolutely. Our guest, Dr. Arthur Ciaramicoli, author of The Stress Solution, Using Empathy and Cognitive Behavioral Therapy to Reduce Anxiety and Develop Resilience. Arthur, please tell our listeners where they can get your books and find out more about you.
Well, Amazon, you can get the book on Amazon right now, or Barnes & Noble online. You can also order it from my publisher, New World Library. It's in most of the bookstores as well. My website is balanceyoursuccess.com, where all of my books are, my blogs, and so forth.
And we'll be back with more after these messages on the OMTimes Radio Network. Please stay tuned.
You're listening to OTR FM, part of the IOM Radio Network.
Are you in an interfaith relationship and thinking of getting married? For 18 years, Reverend Laurie Sue Brockway has been creating personalized, loving, and romantic ceremonies for couples of all faiths and cultural backgrounds. Reverend Laurie Sue's sensitivity to the needs of interfaith couples is reflected in the compassionate and inclusive way she addresses the concerns of parents and families. Reverend Laurie Sue is also the author of several best-selling books on interfaith weddings and wedding vows. Selected as one of the top interfaith officiants by New York Magazine, Reverend Laurie Sue serves couples in the New York metropolitan area and beyond. Find out more at her website, yourinterfaithwedding.com.
OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Come on, smile. Oh, honey, he's still not smiling.
Maybe he's not a smiler.
Yeah, maybe he's just not a happy baby.
Maybe he's just being a boy.
Or maybe he's teething.
Maybe it's just a phase.
Maybe he has autism, and we can definitely do something to help.
Maybe is all you need to find out more about autism. No big, joyful smiles by 6 months is one early sign. Learn the others at autismspeaks.org/signs. Brought to you by Autism Speaks and the Ad Council.
And we're back on Destination Unlimited. My guest tonight is Dr. Arthur Ciaramicoli, author of the new book, The Stress Solution, Using Empathy and Cognitive Behavioral Therapy to Reduce Anxiety and Develop Resilience. So we're doing definitions before. We did your definition of empathy. And for those of our listeners who are not familiar with it, please explain cognitive behavioral therapy.
Well, cognitive behavioral therapy, Victor, focuses on the present, and it basically focuses on misperception. It focuses on the cognitive distortions that we may have learned in perceiving others and ourselves early in our life. In essence, old bias thinking and early conditioning. So cognitive distortions would be things like generalizing, black and white thinking, catastrophizing, mind reading, magnifying, all the ways that we distort what we see and perceive. And perception is key to stress. So when we're using these cognitive distortions, and in the book, this is more of a workbook because I encourage people at the end of each chapter to do certain exercises and to journal and to share their responses with other people to identify the cognitive distortions that we've all grown up with, because everybody has grown up with certain biases, not only about others, but about themselves as well. And that's where empathy comes in, and the combination of empathy and cognitive behavioral therapy is very powerful. The synergy together allows us to perceive more accurately and to reduce stress levels significantly.
So, for example, a cognitive relationship, let's say that I'm a child, or I was, as a child, I was told that I was not good enough. So I have this program running in my brain, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough. How does that result in stress?
Well, it results in stress because as soon as you begin to interact with other people, you're walking, if you believe you're not good enough, and you walk into a crowd of people, or you have to meet some new people at work, or you have to meet a new neighbor, you're already assuming that you're 10 points down, that you're less than that other person. You're carrying that negative self-voice. And I have a chapter in the book that's just devoted to how we talk to ourselves, our self-voice. Because our self-voice can cause stress when we're alone. Just people anticipating meeting a new neighbor, some people are stressed. And they haven't even met the person, but they're already assuming from old conditioning that they're not good enough. And how do we unlearn that? Well, one thing I try to teach people is anything that's learned can be unlearned. No human being came into this world thinking they're not good enough. All 1-year-olds and 2-year-olds think they're wonderful. But then depending on how we're interacted with, we can change our sense of ourselves. So, you know, when you're young, when you're early in life, you look to others to find out who you are. It's like looking into a mirror to get the reflection to see who we are and what our potential is. But if you're looking into cracked mirrors, if you're looking into the eyes of people who have their own distortions, their own biases, it's like looking into a circus mirror. You know, we get a very distorted view of ourselves. So how do we unlearn some of these aspects of negative conditioning and negative self-talk? We have to engage with other people who we know will give us rational, reasonable feedback so we can rewrite the story about ourselves. We all write a story early in life. But for many people, it's a fiction story. It's not a nonfiction book. It's a novel. And we have to take in the feedback of other people that we trust and believe in, who will give us truthful feedback to find out who we are. One of the last chapters in the book is Who Am I? Coming to terms with who you are, but not being dominated by the old biases of the past. And again, that's where empathy training comes in, because as you learn more empathy and as you give it to others, you will receive it in turn. It becomes reciprocal, and you learn more about yourself as you learn more about others. But we all need to rewrite that story that we created early in life about ourselves and make it a more accurate story.
Let's take an example. You mentioned catastrophizing. My generation, a lot of the grandparents and parents would say things like, put on your coat. If you go out without a coat, you're going to get pneumonia. Or don't go to that neighborhood, you'll get beaten up. Or a million different things that would lead one to fear that the worst possible outcome will occur if you do certain things. How do you deprogram? How do you use empathy and CBT to break that belief system?
Well, I'll give you an example. I wrote a chapter in the book, and I was very, very happy that the publisher allowed me to write a chapter on prejudice. And for instance, I gave 8 or 10 comments that my clients had made to me, because people tend to trust me and they know that our sessions are confidential. For instance, one of my patients said to me, you know, he heard a dog barking outside my office, and he said to me, you know, dogs don't like black people. I said, really? I didn't realize that. How come they don't like black people? And he told me this story about he lived in this neighborhood and there was only one black family. It was one of the more affluent neighborhoods outside of Boston. And there was a black family on the corner, and he would walk his dog down, and he just got that sense that the dog never wanted to go in that yard. And I said to him, did you ever take the dog in the yard? Did you ever speak to those people? Well, no, I never really spoke to those people. Anyway, you get where we're going with this. Eventually, he realized that that was a generalization. It was a cognitive distortion. I told him, I have an African-American uncle. My uncle is great with dogs. He has 2 dogs. I have 2 dogs. Our dogs love him. He said, really? I said, yeah. And I said, you created some distortion. He goes, well, that's what my mother used to say all the time. It must be something about the smell. I said, have you been next to an African-American person where you had some odor that you think was offensive to you or an animal? He said, well, I've never really been around that close to an African American person.
Yeah.
And there we go. So, but he's not a bad individual. He's not a person that doesn't have a conscience. It was something that he learned early in life, and he had to unlearn it. And through an empathic interaction, he actually felt apologetic. He came back the next time. He said, the more and more I thought about this, I can't even believe I said that to you.
Yeah. Yeah. We heal, we learn, and we grow when we start applying empathy. Without going specifically into politics and the current election cycle, how do we deal in a world where leaders start using base fears and perhaps cognitive dissonance from our childhood of things like racism, things like mixed messages, and are trying to manipulate the populace using, or a portion of the populace using that? How do you address that?
It's critically important, Victor, for us in this climate, in this very damaging climate, to use the capacity for empathy to perceive accurately and to obtain facts. For instance, someone says when 9/11 occurred in Hoboken, New Jersey, there were hundreds of Muslims running out in the street and cheering. Okay, then you see that there's a store owner interviewed on the day of that when that tragedy occurred, and he said, "I didn't see any people running out in the street. I don't know if I didn't see any Muslims. I didn't see anybody running out in the street." He lives there. He was there on 9/11. Several other people were interviewed. Now we start to obtain the facts. But rather than just believing because you hear something on TV, or you hear a journalist mention something, or a political candidate mention something, what are the facts? We're going to be exposed to debates soon. Presidential, the primary, Secretary Clinton and Donald Trump will be debating. You're going to hear all kinds of facts on both sides. But do you have the patience and the empathy to check out what actually is true? Because people use statistics all the time to be deceptive. We use them with studies. I have a client of mine who's a physician. He does a lot of drug studies. And one of the reasons he came to me is that he felt so guilty about some of the studies because some of the information they release is just not true. Mm-hmm. Well, it's an industry. And look, there are drugs that save people's lives. I'm not criticizing the pharmaceutical industry. I'm only giving you a real life example of where we can't believe everything we hear. Every other day in America, there's a new diet book coming out. And in the publishing industry, a publisher said to me not long ago, "Do you want to write a bestseller?" I said, "Oh, sure." He said, "Well, write a diet book." I said, I don't want to write a diet book." He said, "Just come up with a good title, it'll sell. Americans will buy anything when it comes to diet and weight loss because we have a problem with obesity. But are these diets really factually or objectively studied? Are you looking into the data or the really good nutrition schools that release the data to find out what's true or not?" That's what we have to do in this election. Find out the facts. Don't just listen to your cousin from New Jersey or Michigan who says Donald Trump is this or that or Hillary Clinton is this or that. Take the time to find out the facts. Be objective. That's what empathy is. That's what empathy is and gives us the opportunity to do with in life. But in this election, it's critically important.
I remember as a kid growing up in the 50s and 60s, the civil rights movement and the feminist movement and all of these movements where people were working to promote the sense of empathy amongst human beings, recognizing each other as brothers and sisters and caring for each other and taking care of each other. And yet that seems to have drifted away. How do we get back there?
Well, I think it's recognizing what's important in life. And when you just have a little bit of understanding of even our neurochemistry, we produce certain chemicals that sustain us, allow us to live longer, reduce inflammation, make us have more energy and higher spirits. And then there are other ways of being that produce chemicals that make us age quicker, increase inflammation, hair loss, insomnia, and so forth. Okay, so that's what this book is. I don't go into neurology in any great depth, but I try to explain a few simple facts that the way we relate determines how we live. The way we perceive determines how we live. And it determines the health of our bodies and our brain. So if you're a quick reactor and you perceive quickly and you use cognitive distortions like generalizing and magnifying and catastrophizing, you're going to be unhealthy. There's no question about that. So you have to be committed to slowing the process down in terms of how you observe others and understand others, and also how you understand yourself. Because in order to perceive accurately, which is the key to reducing stress, we have to rid ourselves of some of the old bias thinking that we grew up with.
Absolutely. We're very familiar, most people are familiar with the concept of talk therapy. Do we need to talk about the past to reduce our stress and anxiety levels?
Well, I'm not a fan of talking about the past just to reminisce. But I do believe that we have to talk about the past if it's interfering with the present. I mean, once we understand the origin of our old conditioning and how our past can create distorted views of ourselves and others, we can begin the process of perceiving others and ourselves more accurately. So we don't have to belabor the past, but if it's interfering with the present, it's a problem. Like the example I gave of that man that said dogs don't like black people. Okay, that's going to interfere with his relationship with any African American person. So when he unlocked that distortion and realized that it was mythical, he's now open to engage those individuals differently.
The Stress Solution, the latest book by Dr. Arthur Ciaramicoli. We'll be back with more with Dr. Ciaramicoli after these messages on the OMTimes radio network.
The number one reason girls drop out of school in sub-Saharan Africa is lack of access to feminine hygiene products. The Pads for Schoolgirls Project, an outreach of Humanity Healing International, is changing this paradigm by setting up sewing programs at schools, teaching girls a vocational skill while producing the reusable pads that help keep them attending classes. The girls pay it forward by making and giving pad kits to other girls in need. To learn more, visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Hi, this is Sylvia Henderson, intuitive life coach and energy healer. Are you ready to elevate and rise way above your normal? Be sure to listen to my show, Intuitive Transformations, on OMTimes Radio, Sunday evenings at 9 p.m. Eastern. Get the inspiration you need to transform your life.
Have you ever wondered how to change your love paradigm? The secret key is finding a love partnership, not just a regular connection. How do you find these? Through conscious relationships. Ascending Hearts Dating is a dating site for people like you that believes in second chances and a different type of spiritual connection. Try Ascending Hearts for free today at ascendinghearts.com and change your love paradigm. Ascending Hearts, the premier dating community for the spiritually awake.
Want to know some fun facts about colonoscopies? Colon cancer is 90% preventable. A colonoscopy can detect and prevent colon cancer in one fell swoop. But here's a not-so-fun fact. Lots of people are so uncomfortable even talking about a colonoscopy that they never get one. If you're 50 or 45 for African Americans, get screened now. Maybe even earlier if you have a family history. To schedule a screening today, visit StopColonCancerNow.com.
Hey, America, we need to have a little talk. We've got more food than we know what to do with in this country, yet 17 million kids in America are struggling with hunger. Makes no sense. Luckily, the Feeding America nationwide network of food banks has volunteers gathering excess food and getting it to hungry kids. They're kind of like food angels. Hey, become a food angel yourself by supporting Feeding America and your local food bank at feedingamerica.org. We can't do it without your help. Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
And we're back on Destination Unlimited. My guest is Dr. Arthur Ciaramicoli, talking about his book, The Stress Solution, using empathy and cognitive behavioral therapy to reduce anxiety and develop resilience. Arthur, in your book, you talk about the importance of being authentic to reducing stress. Why so?
Well, when we're trying to please others, which really actually takes away from our ability to be authentic, it creates a stress in the sense that it makes us we're pretending and we're not relaxing, we're not comfortable in our own skin, and pretense is a burden that's depleting. So when we substitute our natural personality, our inherent personality, for one that's trying to please to gain acceptance and love, it's a failing proposition. It also makes it difficult to maintain intimacy because closeness to others is really based on being able to be open, genuine, and vulnerable. So authenticity attracts others in powerful ways and allows us to feel comfortable in our own skin. Authentic relating unquestionably enlivens the spirit, our spirit and others, and it gives us the energy and confidence to go out in the world and tolerate stress and maintain resilience so that we can come home with our self-respect and integrity intact. So when we're authentic, we are calming ourselves and believing that we're good enough to be ourselves with other people. And when we don't feel that way, when we have to pretend or live up to an image, we're producing stress, we're producing cortisol, and other people sense it. And as I said earlier in our discussion, Victor, that's what I call secondhand stress. You know, our neurology talks to each other, our nervous systems talk to each other as if we have remote controls in our hands. So if I'm stressed and I'm uneasy with myself, and I'm afraid to be myself with you, you're going to sense that, and then you don't feel so comfortable.
Can one be authentic and honest at the same time?
Yes, I think we can. We certainly can be authentic and honest, but we have to make decisions, and that's where empathy comes into play with what to say and who to say it to. For instance, if I know you're a very sensitive person, you tend to overreact, and you're very sensitive about your height or your weight or your culture, I'm not going to say everything that comes into my mind, because with empathy, I have to anticipate how you might hear it. So it's not that I'm not being authentic, but I have to deliver the message with care, with tact, because I know that it's a sensitive area for you. And I might even have to preface, if we're having a discussion about a particular aspect that I know you're sensitive about, I might even have to preface it by saying, you know, you're a good friend, I really care about you, but you're asking me about this aspect of yourself. And is it okay if I tell you what I think? But you try to give information with tact and with kindness. You know, I always try to teach people that really great friends give people what they need, not what they want. We don't tell them what they want to hear. We tell people what they need to hear. So if you and I are close friends, and I notice that we go out to dinner and you're drinking 5 of 4 beers, and you have a couple of shots of whiskey, and you don't even drink, normally I'm not going to sit there and not say anything, but how do I say it in a tactful way that won't offend you?
And I guess the question is, how do you combine compassion with empathic listening and speaking?
Well, you know, empathy is the heart of compassion, because when we're communicating with empathy, we're not hitting people over the head with the truth. We're not being brutal. We're anticipating through our compassion how my words are going to be received.
Now, we were talking before about the art of empathic listening and the lost art in our world today, the seemingly lost art of listening. What's the key to true empathic listening? How do people do it?
One thing, always ask yourself, am I talking more than I'm listening? I mean, your point from your mother, and incidentally, my mother said the same thing.
Same generation, I bet.
For a particular reason. Ask yourself if it's reciprocal. You know, look at the other person so you can sense their cues. You know, some people, all they need is a human being across from them, and they will talk for 50 minutes or an hour without stopping, without even looking up to see if you're boring the other person, without even looking up to see if that person has any interest, or even looking up to say, should I go on? Do you want to hear the rest of this story? It's checking in with the other person, looking for their facial cues, their physical cues, to see where we are together. That's part of empathy. And slowing down the process enough and looking up and making contact so it's not just a monologue. It shouldn't be a monologue. And you know, we're not being very empathic when we listen to monologues. A lot of people often say to me, gee, I don't know what to say. My cousin, my wife, they go on and on and on. Well, what about interjecting, you know, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but you've told me that story before. I don't want to hurt your feelings, but it seems like the more you obsess about your boss every night when you come home, the more upset you get. And then you say you can't sleep. So what is the purpose of us talking about this over and over again at 10 o'clock at night?
There's an old line from a Moody Blues song called The Tide Rushes In, where he says, you keep looking for someone to tell your troubles to. I'll sit down and lend an ear and I hear nothing new. That's exactly what you're talking about.
Yes. It's the entitlement of people coming home every night, and I'm going to tell you about my bad day, and I don't really want to listen to yours.
Right.
And thinking that if you really love me, you'll just sit there and listen for an hour.
What about people taking ownership and responsibility for everything in their lives?
Well, human beings are more comfortable with those that are comfortable with their flaws. They're comfortable with their imperfections. And when we're that kind of individual, we don't have much to defend. If you know you're a temperamental person and you've been honest about it and you're working on it, and someone says, geez, you're temperamental, and you say, yeah, I know that, I'm working on it. Rather than getting angry, when you're blaming other people for your own imperfections and the own areas of your life that you need to work on, you're at an impasse. You can't improve because my life then is in your hands. You have to change for me to change rather than I'm going to change. And I see this a great deal in marriages where the finger gets pointed at each other. And oftentimes I say, what's interesting to me is that most people, what they're complaining about, they actually brought into the marriage. It wasn't created by the marriage. If somebody was temperamental, or somebody drank too much, or somebody has an anger problem, or somebody's too sensitive, these characteristics weren't developed when people got married. They were brought into the marriage, and it's taking responsibility for that so that something can be done about it.
How do you employ empathy and CBT with couples?
Well, normally when couples are not getting along, it's a kind of rapid fire, Roger. They're reacting to each other very quickly, and I try to teach them empathy by slowing down and showing how I can hear what the other person's saying or what they're missing that I heard. Like, for instance, the other day, a husband said to me, well, you see how she yells at me? And I looked at him and I said, can we slow this down for a moment? I heard your wife talk emphatically to you, but I didn't hear her yell. No, she was yelling. I said, no, she wasn't yelling. She was being emphatic. So again, I'm correcting the distortion. So as people trust in my perceptions, because I don't have the history that they have with each other, so I'm more able to perceive more accurately, they start to take on that level of perception too.
Now, in your book, you mention image love. What is image love?
Oh, image love is something that performance addicts struggle with a great deal, meaning that they tend to form relationships based on how someone looks or how their resumes read, because that's very much the way they view themselves. And what I mean by image is it's not really based on knowing a person. It's not based on the depth of empathic listening where you really understand another person's character. You're only seeing them on the outside, not on the inside. And, then people get disappointed because what happens? We all age. We all tend to look different. Or someone has a prestigious job, but they get laid off. And now they're not in that prestigious position anymore. Do you love a person for who they are and not just what they do or what they've attained? That is the heart of image love, meaning that they really, you get a clear sense that these people really don't know each other, nor do they spend the time to get to know each other.
Please share some of the exercises that you have in your book, The Stress Solution.
Well, at the end of every chapter, I ask people to take inventory. For instance, there's a stress questionnaire in the book. There's an empathy questionnaire in the book. There's a performance addiction questionnaire in the book. And I give examples of people that I know and people that I'm treating, and I ask, do you identify with any of the particular cognitive distortions that they have? And if you did, for instance, if you tend to generalize like Mr. Smith does, where did you learn to generalize? Can you write that down in your journal? What is the benefit of generalizing? Why are you always saying to your husband, oh, your whole family is like this, or all men are like this, or all women are like this, or Italians or Irish are like this, or Muslims are like this? Where did you learn that? I encourage people to record where they learned it. How do you unlearn it? How do you practice this week perceiving more accurately those particular groups that you've had trouble with or that you have biases or prejudice toward? And then I ask people at the end of each chapter, after they've done those exercises, to take an action, to do something with it, to share it with someone close to you. Because change is an active process. You have to do something with the knowledge you're gaining for it actually to be recorded in your brain and become part of the way you relate in an ongoing basis.
So this is really not only using empathy and the CBT techniques, but we're talking about truly relearning how to live.
We're talking about, Victor, unlearning the ways that we've learned to perceive and as a result live that are not helpful or are not life enhancing for us. And when we can unlearn and learn methods that are more effective through empathy and understanding the cognitive distortions that we have less stress in our lives, and we can pass that on to all of those that are close to us.
What would you like your readers to take away from the stress solution?
I would like them to take away the idea that they can unlearn some of the distorted ways that they've been perceiving. They can reduce their stress significantly. And when anyone enhances their capacity, enlarges their capacity for empathy, they are part of making this a better world.
That's so true. And our guest this evening has been Dr. Arthur Ciaramicoli, author of the new book, The Stress Solution, Using Empathy and Cognitive Behavioral Therapy to Reduce Anxiety and Develop Resilience. Arthur, please tell our listeners one more time where they can get your books and find out more about you and your wonderful work.
The book is available on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, both of their websites, or our publisher, New World Library. You can order the book there as well. And my website is balanceyoursuccess.com. You will see the book on the website, and you can click on to any of those sites where you could order the book as well. And you can see my other books and my blogs, and you can find out information ongoing about where I might be speaking and so forth.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Arthur. I think your work is so important, and our world is demonstrative of that.
Thank you very much, Victor. It's been very interesting interacting with you. You've asked interesting questions, and I know you comprehend this information very well.
I hope I do. Thank you so much. And I am Victor the Voice Furman. You've been listening to Destination Unlimited. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and have a great night.